Mesa el khair, good evening, bonsoir. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thanks to Abu Dhabi Art and to the Farjam Foundation for organizing this event with us. It is a great pleasure to welcome you tonight at Louvre Abu Dhabi for a special event. As a museum built on connection, this is really our DNA. We value our partnerships. And we have a long friendship with Dr. Farjam, which I'm sure very soon will be translated into something we can share in the legacy of Louvre Abu Dhabi. But this idea of connection is what led us to have this important moment. The talk marks actually the unveiling of an impressive achievement, the 4-volume publication, Masterpieces of Islamic Art and Masterpieces of Modern and Contemporary Art, the Farjam Collection, published by Yale University Press. As a museum, as a non-profit organization, in contact with the civil society, we are always delighted to welcome artists, their galleries, and the collectors. It is a true honor to experience the vitality and significance that collections like the one of Dr. Farhad contribute to the cultural dialogue here in the UAE. This publication is a living testimony of his role as a collector, and it highlights the significance of documenting private collections for the study of Islamic and modern art. This year, Louvre Abu Dhabi celebrates its 7th anniversary. We reflect on our growing contribution to the world of art and scholarship. Just launched our program of scholarship at the museum, talking about the DNA of what we are. Since our opening in 2017, we have actually supported the publication of 42nd books, each one of them in Arabic, English, and French, cementing our belief in the power of the book as an enduring object of knowledge and cultural exchange. Our commitment is mirrored by the enthusiasm of our visitors. We had over 5.5 million to date, which including the COVID year, with 1.2 million visitors last year. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to the distinguished experts joining us from all over the world tonight. Dr. Mariet Westermann, Director and CEO of the Solomon Guggenheim Museum and Foundation, a dear friend and colleague. Dr. Nada Shabout, Regent Professor of Art History and the coordinator of the Contemporary Arab and Muslim Cultural Studies Initiative at the University of North Texas. Dr. Linda Komaroff, Curator of Art of the Middle East Department, Head of Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and Dr. Julian Raby, Director Emeritus of the National Museum of Asian Art of the Smithsonian. A special thanks to the moderator, Dr. Venetia Porter, former Senior Curator for Islamic and Contemporary Middle East Art at the British Museum, and currently Honorary Research Fellow at the British Museum and the Courtauld Institute of Art. She will be guiding this very important discussion. Thank you for taking this difficult task. Before ending the discussion to you, Venetia, I invite Dr. Farhad to say a few words. Thank you so much. Enjoy the evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to welcome everybody here. I would like to just mention that my work as a collector is nothing near the works of the luminaries sitting here. Without them, this would not have happened. The books would not be available to students, would not be available to libraries, to researchers, and I'm most grateful to my dear colleagues who worked very hard for 3 years. Thank you, Venetia. And Sheila Kambi sadly could not be with us here. I just want you to know that Sheila, formerly from the Metropolitan Museum, did work very hard on the Islamic part. Mr. Rabate, I thank you very much. I'm grateful to Louvre for this opportunity. And as always, you've been kind enough to give me this platform. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the talk. Thank you.
This switched on? Yes. Well, thank you, first of all, Monsieur Rabate. Thank you, Farhad, for your absolutely wonderful, warm words. It's been a privilege for all of us working on your volumes, really, all of these years. And thank you to Louvre Abu Dhabi for hosting us here, and of course to the Farjam Foundation. It is a really huge privilege for us to be here to talk about the publication of these magnificent books, 4 volumes comprising Islamic art and modern and contemporary art, that you will have seen outside. And I hope if you haven't had time to see them yet, please do leaf through them when you go out. Now, our talk today is really to give you a sense of what these books are about, the range of works that are published in them, and why this collection is important. These books are, so I think I'm going in and out anyway. These books are at once works of reference, and such is the beautiful design that they are also books that you would be proud to have on your coffee table to flip through at your leisure, and you will discover real treasures inside them. They're produced by Yale University Press, one of the great academic presses in the world. And it's been a privilege working with them, and you'll see what a wonderful job they've done. But the guiding light has always been Farhad Farjam, who knew how he wanted the books to look and was involved in the process of the design, and who, it has to be said, was often finding new works that had caught his eye that he wanted to include while we were producing the books. And as I recall, we had to give him a number of ultimatums, I think. No more, we pleaded, but to no avail. But you'll see the result of this incredible collection in the books. So our aim today is to give you a snapshot of the content, the arrangement, the choices of the works, some of the themes, and to look more broadly at the importance of private collections in terms of what they bring to the subject. Now, before we dive into the books, I wanted really to begin at the beginning. And the beginning are the words that you see on the screen from Dr. Farjam's preface to the Islamic art volumes. It has long been my dream to share with an international audience the highlights of a collection that is my love's passion. And it is the fulfillment of the dream that you have now before you. But what has to be said immediately is that what is published comprises a mere 13%, 1/3, of the collection, which consists of over 6,000 objects. And as many of you know, of course, and would expect this, it is continuing to grow. And across the 2 groups of volumes, the 4 volumes altogether, are 800 works. So a huge team of people. So these are the books, of course. And a huge team of people was brought together, whose names you can see on the screen. And I want to firstly mention the team at the Farjam Foundation, led by the curator of the collection, Amir Arvand, and also his colleague, Shari. Now, the publication, has to be said, was initially going to be 1 book, but this was never going to be enough for Dr. Farjam, and the result is 4. For the Islamic volumes, the first cut, as it were, was made by Marcus Fraser and myself, and it was then Dr. Sheila Camby, who Farhad just mentioned, my very good friend and former colleague at the British Museum, who later became head of the Islamic collections at the Met, who then took it on and brought together a really wonderful group of scholars to write essays and individual entries. And sadly, she couldn't be with us today. For the next volume, The Modern and Contemporary, we were 4 editors. So there was Linda and Nada Shabout, Sarah Rogers, who also sadly couldn't be with us today, and myself, and a further army of scholars to tackle the modern and contemporary. But I want to, but we're going to talk about this later, but our intention across these volumes was really to have texts that were readable, accessible to both specialists and non-specialists alike, and to be as authoritative as possible. And you'll find, for those who love such things, footnotes and endnotes, there are plenty of those and extensive bibliographies. But before I go any further, I want to start with you, Mariet. Now, what was the first thing that struck you when Dr. Farjam invited you to consider writing the foreword to the Modern and Contemporary Art volume?
Well, thank you very much for asking such an open-ended question. As he asked me that question and I was sitting across from him, I thought, and I said, yes. I said yes because I thought, how do you say no to the older brother you never had? The slightly older brother you never had, which is really how my friendship with Dr. Farhad has evolved over the years. And then the next thing I thought, well, that was a really dumb thing to say because he asked me to write a foreword to the book on modern and contemporary art. And I'm a historian of European painting of the 16th, 17th, 18th century, even though I've always loved modern contemporary art. And I thought, well, oh no, the other books wouldn't be good either because that's Islamic art and I'm hardly a scholar of Islamic art. So I thought, now I've really done it. I've committed to this. And I talked to him about it and he said, you said something very reassuring, I remember, Farhad, something to the effect of, but art is art. And this is indeed something I believe, and that is an idea that I share very much with Dr. Farhad and his collection. So I'll say something about that. And of course, the irony is that at the time that I agreed to do it, I was leading a university, New York University Abu Dhabi here, which was a great joy for many years. And of course, in universities, professors are a little bit arrogant. We kind of think we can do everything. So you also just kind of go with it and you do it. And now, of course, a year or so later, since it actually happened, I am actually leading a Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. And I think you gave me a little confidence, maybe, to think that I could take this on. But what do I mean about art is art and why is that important? I want to say something about Dr. Farhad Farjam as a collector. There are many different kinds of collectors, but the finest among them and whose legacies really are sustained often in institutions and in publications like this, and in exhibitions and in scholarship and the ways in which the art touches so many people around the world, it's usually because that collector truly loves what he or she collects, goes after it with enormous discernment and the very hard work of learning, always learning and curiosity. And then the really, really great collectors who are interested in the legacy of this work of gathering, caring and sharing. Sharing is caring for works of art, after all, so that they can be preserved into the future. These things that have been made over many, many thousands of human years, that they can be preserved for the future so that stories can be told with and around them. This is, of course, what great museums do. They collect for a reason. And the greatest collectors and collectors like Farhad, even if they didn't know it yet, that was always there. That drive to make things available and share. And so how did Dr. Farhad become a collector? I mentioned it in my foreword. It's such a charming story. And it's one of the first stories he told me because I already got to know his collection, I think in 2007 when I first started living here. And it was all in 2 gigantic apartments in Dubai. Some of you have been there in La Rêve. And since then, of course, has moved to other places. But seeing them, I asked, how did you become such an amazing collector of especially Islamic art, and especially your greatest love, maybe paintings, illustrated manuscripts or Qurans, illuminated manuscripts rather, and also the great Persian literature. And he tells the story. He had moved, and this is how you could see what a real collector he is. He couldn't leave it alone. He had gone as a young man from Iran, pre-revolution, to study in New York. And on a break, he was in Los Angeles. New York is bad weather in the winter. He went to Los Angeles to enjoy it. And he was at the time just really studying in the scientific field, an engineering kind of field. And one day he's walking through Los Angeles and he walks, and out of the corner of his eye, he sees in an art gallery, he was predisposed to art. His parents had predisposed him to beautiful things in his home city of Shiraz, but he had not really thought about this. And out of the corner of his eye, he sees a beautiful painting, what's often called a miniature painting, but really is a painting of scale from a book known as the Shahnameh, the great stories of the Persian kings. And it sticks in his head. He kind of looks in the window. He's never bought anything like it. He goes home and he is a student who is kind of cobbling together his resources that have been spared for him to be able to go study in New York. And I think there's even maybe a nice scholarship in there somewhere. And he goes back and he finds out what the price is and he realizes that, there's no way he can afford this thing. And he goes home again. And he comes back and he's up at night. He can't leave it alone. He thinks it's such a beautifully drawn thing. And he comes back the next day and he's just cashed in half the scholarship and he buys the work of art. Now, as a university leader, I don't approve of using your resources in this way, but it was the start of a great collection. And it is that passion. Are you all right? There's water. No. It's important. And so that passion he has then since then obviously parlayed into years and years of really learning and studying and getting to know all of us. The reason you saw that beautiful mastheads of all these colors is we want to work with them because it is so very special. So that's what I want to say. I will have more to say about why art is art, but I think I wanted to first say really what makes a really great collector. And that impulse to share that gathers you around us. Because what was that? What was that miniature of that painting? That painting is a beautiful description of one of those kings whose names you never remember. I'm not a Shahnameh expert from the ancient Persian world, who sits and bestows gifts of magnificence on his courtiers, who are clearly his friends. This is what you do. This is what you do with your art to all of us who know you, but also to the whole world of people who you feel can learn about art. And like you, I believe that anyone can learn about art, especially when it is as beautiful and as generously shared as it is by you.
Thank you, Mariet. Thank you. Thank you, Mariet, very much. I think it'd be interesting to talk later about also the role of such a collection, having it here in the UAE. But for now, I want to go into the books themselves. So just to give you a kind of snapshot of what is in them. So we have this is the Islamic art volumes here. And within it are 6 main chapters: faith in the Quran, science and learning, animals and birds in Islamic art, private life and public splendor, and the spoken words and enduring legacies. Now, in each case, we have an introductory essay. So this is the first one, Faith and the Quran, with an excellent essay by François Desroches, one of the great experts on Qurans. And then I'm also showing you these pages, not expecting you to read the text here, but it's just to begin to give you a sense of the extraordinary design in these. So this is the beginning of François Desroches' essay. And then we have, in this particular section, entries on the manuscripts written by Marcus Fraser, and these are real works of reference, the combination of the essay and the individual entries. And for anybody who's tried to write such entry, these are very difficult to do indeed. So then you'll see there are in the different sections some of the glorious objects that are in the collection, such as these, the ones we saw before. And now we come to the modern and contemporary art, which is really going to be the focus of a lot of the rest of our talk today. So there's a wonderful exhibition that some of you may have already seen in Abu Dhabi Art. curated by Murad Montazimi, of works from the collection, from the Farjam collection, that are an echo of the exhibition that Murad curated, Présence Arabe, in Paris, which was really a wonderful exhibition. And it was an absolute thrill for Linda, Julian, and I last night as we walked around the exhibition to see so many works that we had only seen images of in the book, and including this painting of Marwan, which was so much bigger than I had realized. So when you go, Nada, it'll be an absolute treat in store for you to see the exhibition there. Now, one thing that was a complete surprise to us as we embarked on this monumental project was that Dr. Farjam also has a significant collection of non-Middle Eastern contemporary. And maybe in the future, that's going to be a subject of another volume. I can't believe you're going to stop here. And so the challenge for us was really how to organize a publication on such a collection in a way that really spoke to the richness of the Farjam collection. So that was our one critical issue there. We wanted to avoid these rigid categorizations such as calligraphy, modernism, Arab, Iranian, and instead to create a dynamic approach where the objects were in dialogue with each other across regions, media, and timeframes. And in the introduction, we highlighted some of the key objects as we saw them that you see here. And so these were some of the topics that were addressed in the introduction that you can see here: abstraction, the interaction of past and present, icons of literature, of culture, and so on. And one of the things was we wanted to bring in the international contemporary within this introduction, and to create dialogue. So you can see in this particular very nice spread. So we have the American pop artist Andy Warhol, whose 1955 hand-colored lithograph speaks to issues of fashion, popular culture, commodity culture, and it's placed alongside contemporary Moroccan artist and photographer Hassan Hajjaj, who is transforming photography as a mass reproduced medium into individualized artwork through these handmade frames. And both artists were speaking to movements between fashion and art. Now, we were keen to let the objects speak, but also to bring in a whole range of other voices. So we came up with the idea of what we call thought pieces. And we invited various writers to choose the topics and what they wished to talk about. So we just sent them the PDFs with all of the images, and then all these wonderful writers gathered works and wrote about them. And of course, one of these essays is by the excellent writer who you all know, Maya Allison, who did a very, very exhaustive survey, actually, of the art of the UAE. And it has to be said that works by UAE artists form a very significant part of this collection. Now, we also decided, so these are further sections. You can see essays. Here we have Sultan Al-Qasimi, for example, Nada, who's going to speak to us later about some of the artworks. And we decided to do interviews with artists, and that turned out to be really, really interesting. So, for example, we had Roxanne Zand speak, interview Dana Awartani. I interviewed Abdel Nasser Karam. Then we had Duygu Demir interviewing Azadeh Koker, a very important Turkish artist. And then Linda had a wonderful interview with Yusuf Nabil. And then she also did the interview with Shirin Neshat and Shoja Azari. And then Nada had a wonderful interview with Rashid Rana. And I think these interviews were really interesting to do. And then in terms of, this was something we really wrestled with, was how were we going to arrange the entries? So we really, really wrestled with this. But in the end, we came up with just a simple alphabetical order that turned out to be, in a way, the most effective, actually. And so so through this, you come up with really interesting juxtapositions. Now, who would have known that the work of Hafiz Drubi would look so good next to the work of Helen Hall? So that was really, really interesting. And so I just want to show you just a couple of images here. So just really to emphasize the design, this beautiful Kiarostami, which is just spread across a double page. And then also in terms of collecting, it's really worth emphasizing the range of the collection. Now, in addition to paintings, Dr. Farjam has, I don't know where he stores this actually, Ayman Bahalbaki's car with its luggage, which of course is resonant as a work in the present time. And then also, I think what is really wonderful, of course, so many of you know here, Tariq al-Hussein, who was just beloved by everyone who met him and absolutely revered by his students. And it was really a joy to hear that Dr. Farjam had supported the creation of a fellowship in his honor at New York, Abu Dhabi. It's a really wonderful thing. But Nada, I want to go back to the arrangement because it was initially not straightforward at all, and we were all in different parts of the world. So, and we had
A lot of time meeting,
we spent a lot of time on Zoom, and
which was fun. We enjoyed, we liked each
yeah,
other, so it was good. But yes, we sort of went through various ways of how to approach the collection and the book. Sarah Rogers and I are, we teach, and so we are thinking about teaching material and what's good for our students, as well as the overall organization. So we at the end, after going through, we've spent like we'd meet for 3-4 hours, debate and discuss things, including, are we using the term Middle East or are we using West Asia and North Africa, and why, and what's going on today. So it was a great excuse to cover a lot of scholarly issues, a lot of intellectual issues that are important at the moment. And at the end, we decided to actually let the collection guide us. So giving said joy working with all these different objects of work. And as Mariet was talking about, Dr. Farjam as a collector, you see actually the passion that comes through from the collection of the work, from your engagement with us, just the perfect collector. Kind of discussing things with us, talking to us, but giving us space to do our thing. So at the end, it was really what we ended up doing is see the works, let the works talk to each other. Let's see what themes come out of the works. And in fact, the 3 sort of big categories we outline in the introduction are based on that. Those sort of conversations that were happening between the artists that were actually happening at the time as well, in the in the Arab world as well as in Iran and Turkey. So, this is then how we also decided to supplement with interviews and thought essays to kind of fill in the gaps. So for me, this becomes a very usable material for teaching. Which is
So Linda, what was
I was just going to say, because a couple of weeks ago when we started talking about this, I went through and found some of her old notes. And it reminded me, the thing that was most amazing about the process, other than the fact we never had any fights, was that we started out with this huge list. And it was so hard to cut it down because there were so many wonderful works in it. And I remember we got into heated discussions. Well, okay, then we'll have to add this one instead. And then, of course, Dr. Farjam was continuing to buy. So that meant taking something out and putting something else in. But as a museum curator, it was such a wonderful experience to see such a wealth of material. And instead of having to say we need more of this, saying no, we need less.
Linda, you have a foot in both camps as a curator initially of Islamic art before falling in love with the contemporary And the Farjam collection is unusual in having such a strong representation of both Islamic art and modern and contemporary art. What do we learn from having these collections together?
Well, I mean,
Yep, sorry, Rita, I just made a film.
well, it's something I've done myself at my museum as building, being a curator of Islamic art and then building a collection of contemporary Middle East art. I think what's perfect about these volumes is that, well, each part of the collection, of the two parts, can be appreciated on its own. It's so much richer when it's combined together. And I think this is especially important for younger people, especially younger people in this region who may think that contemporary and modern art just emerged from from the influence of the West or just simply appeared one day. It's so important to show that it's part of a much longer tradition of creativity. So I think that's what's great about the having the two volumes together, or the 4 volumes, which are very hard to carry.
Linda, take us through your wonderful images that you put together.
Okay, yeah, we'll start here. So I recently organized an exhibition at my museum called Dining with the Sultan, the Fine Art of Feasting, which is intended to introduce American audiences to Islamic art and culture through the universal lens of food and fine dining. Works of art in the exhibition, such as these, which the Farjam Collection generously loaned, engaged viewers as they recognized or imagined the object's relationship to food and their own dining experiences. For example, these glazed ceramic vessels are sufficiently related to the form and material that viewers themselves use today with their present day tableware. And as the exhibition demonstrated, in the 9th century, this novel type of tableware was introduced around the same time that a new cuisine and a burgeoning interest in the culinary arts had emerged at the Abbasid court in Baghdad, not unlike, in fact, our own fascination today with food culture. Dating to the Mamluk dynasty, the Farjam lunchbox, which is in the upper left, is a bit larger and less colorful than the lunchboxes that many of us had as school children. But in the exhibition, it was contextualized in a section on picnicking and outdoor dining, and with another lunchbox, which is the one in the center, that's in LACMA's collection, allowing visitors to understand that these were portable containers for food, and especially as the recognizable form of the canteen suggests, also for beverages. This is, for me, this is just one of the many ways to engage audiences with the art of the past. Another is contemporary art, as artists are often themselves engaged with historical art. And I should mention, from my own experience, it's much harder to get visitors interested in the old stuff than it is to the new stuff. But so artists are also engaged with historical art. And indeed, the past is a frequent source of inspiration for artists of the Middle East and diasporic communities, whether the long past, the recent past, a collective past, or a personal past. The motives are various and sometimes overlapping, for instance, as sources of visual expression, a search for identity, return to traditionalism, a nostalgic longing, or a means of social or political messaging. This intersection between past and present, so well represented by the Farjam collection, is one way of engaging with historical and contemporary art, which pulls us in both directions. Here we have 2 works focusing on Rustam, the greatest warrior of the Iranian national epic, the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, completed in the early 11th century, but still read and admired even today. At right is a page from a 16th century illustrated such manuscript in which the mighty hero is depicted in his characteristic tiger skin robe and leopard-headed helmet. But opposite is a new version of the great paladin, as envisioned by Siamak Felizadeh. With his Dolce & Gabbana belt, his mobile phone, and Rolex watch, Felizadeh transports the mythical hero to present-day Tehran, which you recognize with the Azadeh Tower in the background. The only thing left unstated here is which master this new Rustam serves. 17th century single-page Persian painting, such as the one at the right, depicting an attractive beauty of Isfahan, inspires the artist Farrow Suli. Work is at the left. She borrows from the visual vocabulary of traditional Persian painting, but especially depictions of women. In Aydin Agdashlu's painting, an historical work, this time a male beauty from Isfahan, is directly incorporated into the composition as a crumbled, discarded remnant of the past. In addition to subject matter, to which they give new meaning, contemporary artists also look toward historical design and mediums, such as the case with this remarkable glass sculpture by Yasmin Aslan Bakari, which recreates an Ottoman-era kaftan decorated with the traditional design of rows of wavy lines, which appear on Ottoman silk robes. But she's also referencing the spectacular practice of Islamic glassmaking, as we can see in these two glasswares from the Farjam collection. Some contemporary works are inspired by Islamic architectural traditions, alluding to the grander scale, embellishment, or functionality of these structures. Here, Abdel Nasser Aram employs the ubiquitous dome to convey a message built upon sectarian symbolism. His sculptural work, Messenger, is in the form of an enormous burnished copper dome, reminiscent of the coloring and profile of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, but here precariously elevated on one end by a golden crescent, similar to the one that sits atop the actual monument, and from beneath which a white dove seems to flutter. Writing as a form of artistic expression is perhaps the most universal means by which the past and present intersect. The art of writing in the Arabic script has been and is a signifier and shaper of identity. It became central to all aspects of daily life in historical Islamic lands on account of the language-specific nature of the faith. Divine revelation was in Arabic, preserved and transmitted in writing through the Quran, which led to the development of classical scripts that have endured over the centuries. By the mid-20th century, artists who had incorporated writing in their practices began to experiment with the Arabic alphabet, concentrating on the malleable or rhythmic qualities of the letters, working primarily with brush and paint, and often on a scale much larger than a book page. A master calligrapher, Munir Asharani, applies a modern sense of design by reworking classical scripts. Here, as you can see, he emulates the gold on blue color scheme of the renowned Blue Quran on the other side, while transforming its Kufic script into a more minimalist composition of the Basmala. Muhammad Asai is likewise a trained calligrapher as well as a graphic designer. Professional sensibilities that he brings to this composition at the left, using the traditional Nastaliq and Muhakkak scripts in a more contemporary composition that still relates to the earlier Quranic illumination, as you see on the other side. As beautiful as these two pages of calligraphy are, they were intended for practice training in which the student repeats the master's model over and over again, completely filling the page by rotating it. These mashq nonetheless came to be treated as works of art worthy of preserving in albums. Here again, Muhammad Asai creates an overlapping sequence of repeated words, not unlike the historical mashq, but with a greater sense of abstraction and dimensionality. Reza Mafi, opposite, one of Iran's greatest modern calligraphers, likewise references the mashq with his layers of overlapping words in this sculptural three-dimensional composition. One last pairing, the type of square Kufic carved in stone with the names of the Prophet, the Rashidun, and other close companions provides an obvious point of reference for the larger painting opposite. It's the work of Ahmed Mustafa, whose PhD focused on Arabic script, giving him both a practical and historical knowledge of the subject. Here he overlays the square Kufic with Thulth script, which along with his use of color gives the composition of dynamism and movement, while challenging the viewer to see the script separately. Clearly, legibility begins to become an issue, so I thought I would end with these wonderful abstract works by Pilaram and Rashid Qureshi, which you can see at the art fair, this particular work, in which each creates a modern new visual language without reference to the past. Okay.
Thank you. Now, Nada, you've chosen some works to talk about.
Yes, thank you. And actually, this is a great place to end because as we can all see, even through the Islamic examples, I mean, what is writing but an abstract sort of forms and repetition and arabesque? And that's exactly what many of the artists in the modern age would look into. Now, we're going to look at a few examples of just masterpieces of works that are in the show, but the general theme and one of the things that I got to do through this book is to not only look at Arab artists. I work on modern Arab artists, 20th century. And so, I sort of fall in between the past and the contemporary. But I was able to not only look at works of other eras, but also works of other parts of the world. Look at the Iranian work, look at the Turkish work. When doing the interview with Rashid Rana, I mean, what was nice about that is completely out of my comfort zone to think of how artists of different parts of the world, of the former, Islamic empires, actually approach the modern contemporary. But abstraction is definitely something we see across. Now, I mean, we all know about abstraction as a European modernism as well, but we can also very much see through the examples of the past that abstraction is an intuitive, actually, practice for the region itself, having been exposed to abstraction. As a matter of fact, early in the 20th century, the fascination for most Arab artists was the non-abstract, going to Europe and learning Impressionism, and we see some of their examples, or just the naturalist way of painting that sort of interested them until they, as an exercise, until they really started, as Linda mentioned, having more interest in forming identities. I mean, mid 20th century, independence days, countries being formed, new countries being formed. And so representing those countries. Now, some of the artists, like we're looking at Mahmoud Said, who a trained lawyer, judge, but also took art classes while he was studying in Europe, and produced some marvelous, works, and became a full-time artist when his father passed away. So please let your kids be artists if they have the desire, because clearly his passion shows through, and you can see kind of the reduction of forms and shapes, but in his own kind of very unique style, versus, for example, Paul Gergosian, who displaced from an Armenian in Jerusalem, displaced to then Lebanon, but training in the church in uh, uh, icon painting and stained glass, but then very interested in not just sort of, Madonna and Child, but with his own relationship with his own mother and the idea of the family, but then gesturally kind of, transformed into these shapes and lines, in a career that produced, a number of amazing works. But also in the work of Etel Adnan or Samia Halabi, the sort of abstraction of space, of geography into planes and colors. And, Samia Halabi, one of the amazing artists who did video work in the 1980s, extremely progressive work that was experimental as well as abstract, and looking into not just the shape and the form, but also the time. And I think everybody by now is very familiar with Etel Adnan's work and this sort of abstracting of Saliba Dwehi is another artist who did this, abstracting sort of areas, mountains or villages, as into sort of colors and spaces of line that become of more significance personally, but at the same time, they're universal in the language that they give. But and then definitely the experiment that is a little bit easier to locate as a collective with the Baghdad Group for Modern Art in Iraq in the mid 1950s. And if we think of modernism across the region, it's a complicated thing to say when and and what exactly was modernism as it was unfolding throughout the region. But the idea, and early in Egypt, for example, in the 30s and 40s, a search for an identity looked a lot more into, let's say, Pharaonic past, as opposed to what was happening mid 20th century in Iraq, 1951, as they formed the group, is look at the Islamic past as well. So, looking at Maqamat al-Hariri, the Hariri assemblies, the 13th century Abbasid work, and the so-called school of Baghdad, which to them also, looked extremely modern. And tomorrow, Murad and I, when we talk about sort of the experiences that they had in France, both Jawad Salim and Shakir Hassan Al Said were in Paris for different periods of time. Jawad for less than a year, Shakir for longer, but both learned from that experience of particularly going to the Louvre in Paris and seeing the Mesopotamian heritage and learning more about the roots of what I would say the roots of modernism, taking that back to Baghdad when they went there to sort of negotiate a new identity of what it needs to be an Iraqi at a time, when they were just part of the city of Baghdad, for example. And so, examples of what you see in Jawad Salim, the cream seller, beautiful work. I can't wait to see it tomorrow in person, where he's not just looking at folk era, and particularly because the Baghdad of the 1950s was not, you would not really see this. It was a city that is modernizing. And so there's a romanticizing, but also a denial of the reality of the time that we see in the work of Jawad and aesthetics that he was forming, what we call hilaliyat with all the crescent shapes, versus Shakir Hassan's work that progressed from the figural through abstraction to the point where it is actually an excavation of space and time to reach. He's a very complicated artist to reach the one dimension theory, which is very sort of Sufist as well as existentialist at the same time. But the Baghdad of the 1950s was actually more this kind of Baghdad that you would see. And you're seeing the Monument of Freedom by Jawad Salim, the work that he, in fact, passed away before finishing it, but through the lenses of Latif Al-Ani, a photographer who learned photography while working at the Iraqi Petroleum Company. So a lot of the images he took were aerial views, were sort of focusing more on modern Baghdad through its architecture and spaces than it was on necessarily the aesthetics that the Baghdad group for modern art, who specifically wanted to negotiate new aesthetics through what they called istilham al-turath. So turath, the tradition, was something that was a conduit for them, a way of understanding moving forward through the history and the heritage itself. That one image by Latif Al-Ani with the school lunch, I mean, that really reminds me of me in Baghdad in school carrying that bottle of milk. It's a beautiful, nostalgic work that shows that becomes very documentary as well of much of what was happening in Baghdad at the time. Yeah. Is that the last slide?
There's one more, but then we need to go on to Julian.
Yes. And then just quickly, to end with, two of my most favorite works, Kadhim Haidar and the Azawi, who, generation after the Jawad Salim and Shakir Hassan, look into the notion of istilham and turath in a very different way, and invoking sort of more of secularized, but, religious stories that then become, sort of a way of expressing new political even positions.
Thank you, Nada, very much for giving us such a wonderful snapshot, and to you, Linda, as well, really, for bringing the past and the present together in such a brilliant way. Now, Julian, we're turning to you for the big picture. What is the role of the collector and a collection such as this? What role does it play in terms of our field, the field that we all love and study? No pressure, big picture.
I hope less here than in Europe and in the States. There is not the growing sense of unease about the private collection, because there's a sad tendency in academia to somehow, I'll say, privilege the public museum over the private collector, as if there is some moral difference. Actually, if we look across the whole conspectus of museums, they range enormously, just as the conspectus of private collectors ranges enormously. So establishing a kind of apples and oranges approach is a huge mistake. And if we set aside a museum like this one, few museums have been created in recent years, as it were, ex nihilo. But in most cases, national museums have actually been formed on the basis of private collections, whether those were royal collections or aristocratic collections, or the compassionate obsessions of someone like Sir Hans Sloane at the British Museum. So what we have to ask is, what is it that in today's world the private collection can contribute? We've already had many of those answers. But if we look at the achievement here, what we see is a kind of panoptic vision that is really difficult to find in any public museum. That juxtaposition of historic Islamic art with modern and contemporary. And when we look at historic, one of the few things we didn't look at were examples from the 19th century, of which there are many in Dr. Farhad's collection. So in other words, there is a huge historical continuity. But above all, I think your extraordinary achievement has been, as we've just seen, in the modern and contemporary. And what are the lessons we can learn from that? It isn't just a question of looking at individual artists or schools, but actually thinking of how these represent moments of social change. And actually, that's a lesson we could take back into understanding how we look at historic Islamic artifacts. Now, Linda herself did that brilliantly in a huge exhibition that looked at the momentous destruction that the Mongols brought, and then this efflorescence that happened under the Yohannis. But those moments of social change that are so apparent in some of these decades that Linda and Nada have discussed, that's a model for us to begin to look at how we investigate the past. But if you also look at other achievements that private collectors can make, it is in lending, it's in sharing. And we have two examples. So Linda gave some specific examples of objects that were lent to a recent exhibition of hers. And you've been very generous in this. And I think for me, it was a revelation yesterday to see that exhibition with Murad of Arab presences. Brilliantly curated exhibition that drew on some key artists working in Paris. So that's that interaction between painter and galleristas and the kind of social concerns of the time. That is an extraordinary achievement, and I think that here we don't give enough credit to the dynamism that some private collectors, like yourself, can bring to this field. But we can go further. So we've heard a lot about the creation of these books, the enormous amount of work and research that went into them. So they are, as it were, a record for posterity. And actually, if you look at most museum collections, public museum collections, they are doing exhibitions, but all too often now, they are ignoring museum catalogues. It's a sad change of the last 20 years. So, how can we look at this a bit more positively? And one way is to actually try to move away from what I will call the imprisonment of possession, the way in which our custodianship of objects in the museum makes us very cautious, circumspect about how we share. So I'll just give you one example. Look how difficult it is to get museums across the world to develop a common digital platform that would allow a single search to bring up examples of whatever it is, a particular artist, a particular typology of object. And instantly, you could have access to something greater than the individual parts. What we deal with it as a different matter. The sadness about this unwillingness of museums to share, to develop a common platform, is that actually what we're going to do is to leave the gaps between those museums to be filled by commercial projects. And Google Art Project has actually done a great job, but I do feel that museums themselves are failing in this respect. So I'd like to go further and suggest that actually we should be looking at a much more vigorous dynamic between the private collections and the public collections to break down this barrier of possessiveness and instead think, what is it together that we can do for the field? I think that's probably what I got to say.
Thank you. Well, thank you for these very wise words. Yeah.
Can I add just something quickly to say that on top of what Julian just said, to be honest, modern and contemporary, and particularly modern Arab art, is not in any museum that we know of. I mean,
Exactly.
now there are
I can think of
thanks
two.
to efforts like Venetia, thanks to what you're going to be doing and adding to that.
It's
But
that-
the reality is, it's not. I am curating a show on the Baghdad Group for Modern Art. All the works are coming from private collections because at least, Dr. Farhad can buy these works. To get a museum to buy a work of art, requires a long process that may or may not happen based on, lots of factors. So I think they become even more important for us as scholars.
I think we're going to have a few minutes to ask questions from the floor. But Mariet, I wanted to come back to you and this, because you were here, you saw Dr. Farjam build this collection. What do you think this collection, what role do you think this particular collection plays within the UAE?
I think it is an extremely important avant-garde collection. There are others here, of course. When you think of His Highness Sheikh Sultan Al-Qassemi's collection, the Brazil Foundation, there are other great collectors in the leading families of the country, expatriate collections as well. But I think that Dr. Farhad's collection does something very special that transcends its importance in the UAE, although it is very important in the UAE because he always shared it. He shared it at La Rêve. I brought people through there all the time to drive people crazy almost. Your team would always receive us. The Farjam Foundation in the IFC built a museum quality 2-level space with constantly changing exhibitions, research projects, and the like. Now in the Gate Village, in the Gate, you can still go and so on. That sharing was very important. But this is what I think is so unique that I want to put one slightly finer point on even then. It's so wonderful because all of you, and Linda and Nada, you have shown us so well how this collection, how the modern and contemporary and the Islamic and even not particularly Islamic works from historical Islamic lens. There's plenty of secular art in here too, so to speak. I want to just stress, despite those obvious connections that, well, they're not obvious, but you brought them out. Despite those many connections, it truly is unusual, in my mind, for a collector to be this brilliant at and diligent and curious about two completely different realms of collections. The collections are distinct. You see it in those two beautiful sets of volumes of books. There's a governing aesthetic mind at work that is also a social mind. And I want to stress that it really is not so familiar for people to gain this expertise in Islamic art. And on the other hand, art not just from the broad Manasa region, but also, as you said, from modern and contemporary Europe and America. And that always has been there. It is not like one thing really came after another. Maybe there was a little bit of a trajectory there, but you've always been doing these things in parallel. And so when I set out to write a little bit about what I think about this collection and the collector, I thought, well, who else has done this? And I realized that there's actually something deep in the history of art that has been there, that for some people here will be very familiar, but that I had sort of let slip into the recesses of my graduate education at the Institute of Fine Arts of NYU, which is that there is a great aesthete and painter who came before Farhad in developing this same joint ability. And wouldn't you know it, I sort of believe in providence, I think, because in this very museum today, the man who preceded you is represented in a very important moment, an exhibition that is here right now. And this is the exhibition that I encourage everyone to go see if you haven't yet. It's a wonderful exhibition of the kind that the Louvre Abu Dhabi produces with its partners, Agence France Museums, so regularly, a show of post-impressionism. You know the paintings, Signac, Seurat, Van Gogh, Gauguin. It's a treasure trove. Now, as I walked in there, I said, wait a minute, that term post-impressionism was coined by a man named Roger Fry, after the fact, sort of, or while post-impressionism was in way. Roger Fry, forgive me, this will go back to Farhad Farjam. Roger Fry was a member of the so-called Bloomsbury group, the Bloomsbury circle of writers, poets, modernist painters, and critics that gathered around the British Museum and Library, basically, lived in that area, Virginia Woolf and so forth. And Roger Fry was a very, very decent painter, a good painter, and he painted in this post-impressionist manner that is very abstracting, that moves towards abstraction, out of impressionist discovery, but pushes away from the appearances of the world, and therefore lays the foundation for a lot of this modernist art that we have just looked at. And Roger Fry does all this, and somehow this predisposed him at one point to realize that there was another whole realm of art that he'd never really thought about, which is the art of Islam. Even the very early pre-Islamic art, then Islamic art, and how that connected to medieval art. He got interested in this. The very year that Roger Fry organizes the first post-impressionist exhibition, that's where the word comes from, in London. That very same year, he takes a special trip to Munich, where there is an amazing exhibition in Munich. 1910, Europe knew Islam before 9/11. I just want to stress it. Probably should have said that. Anyway, Europe has known Islam. Muslims have lived in Europe for a long time. It's been collected, it's been made. And of course, Europe belatedly is realizing this now. In 1910, they knew this perfectly well in Munich. And what does Roger Fry does? He's not an expert, but with the sort of confidence of the cosmopolitan Bloomsbury critic, he goes down there and he writes what I consider an extremely important two sets of essays in the Burlington magazine, the most important journal for aesthetes and art historians and museum professionals at the time, still published today. And he writes, and when you read that essay, as I read it, I thought, I'm reading through the eyes of Farhad Farjam. Somehow this interest in abstraction and other ways of representing what lives among human beings, what they put into the aesthetic, somehow it made him able to look at that art. I'm sure that most of what he wrote is kind of discredited today on all sorts of grounds. It is the openness, the seeing the world of others you might never have known through their art that I think connects these two things. So I wanted to say that is important to the history of art in general and to our museums, and whether the museums live online, as I think they should, or in the museums, the very fact that you can, for a moment, see something maybe from Ming China and think that it also sort of belongs to you, even if you never were in China. And I think that is what you do. And then when you look at that art, you also think about the people who made it and who can see it. So that's this humanity in the work that I wanted to put a fine point on.
Thank you so much, Mariet. Now, I have a feeling that we've exhausted our time. I need a steer from somebody. Do we have a couple of minutes for questions, or shall we reserve the questions for outside? So I'd like you to join me in thanking our wonderful panel, my lovely, lovely colleagues. It's been a real joy working with you, Nada and Linda, and of course with Sheila and Sarah Rogers. It's been a real privilege, and we've had a lot of fun. Not that many ups and downs.
No, more fun.
No, and not at all. But it's really, we want to thank you, Farhad, for giving us actually the huge privilege of working with you on this. And for what you do, for sharing. And Julian is completely right in saying that actually museums are now very difficult to borrow from, that everyone goes to private collections. And we all know how generous you have been in that. And I do think I can safely say that this is not going to stop here, that there will be more books. You know, I mentioned that it was 13%. I feel sure there will be more books. There is already a growing website. And really wishing you all the best in the world for what you do, and to thank you so much for Hasdan.